Here we are getting past the locks. Locked up? Imagine the sound of a heavy metal door sliding shut, sealing you up in a small cell. What must it feel like to be confined, to be stripped of freedom and dignity, to be locked up? If you have not been arrested or imprisoned, it is hard to know how that must feel. Or imagine there's an accident and the police are there trying to assess the cause of the accident. And judging from the skid marks on the pavement, they conclude that the brakes locked up. What must it feel like to be trapped in a car headed for a collision with no brakes? Or imagine the person with lockjaw, the condition of sustained jaw muscle spasm, often associated with tetanus, unable to open or operate their mouth in a normal manner. Or it can be affiliated with a disease when you can no longer do anything but maybe sip through a straw. What is it like to be unable to open your mouth to eat or to talk? How helpless and cut off from everybody that you must feel. Locked up, locked away, locked down. It is not a pleasant metaphor, is it? Especially if you are on the wrong side of the lock. Locks are often the tools of the fearful and the totally insecure people. They protect peace when it feels, fragile, or possessions when they feel threatened. And here we are on the second Sunday of Easter. Our gospel is full of locks. Locked doors, locked hearts, locked minds. You can almost hear the deadbolts and the padlocks clinking around in this text. What does the resurrection of Jesus have to say to these locked doors and locked lives? Both in the first century and in the 21st century. Let's see. First, the locks of fear. The locks of fear guard the doors of the room where the disciples are hiding, but Jesus passes the locks and the doors, and he stands in the midst of the group as if the disciples were standing in an open field. How disconcerting this must have been for those fearful disciples who trusted in the power of their security system to protect them from sight and surprise approach. John's gospel tells us that the disciples were hiding behind locked doors for fear of the Jews. In other words, they feared for their lives, for their reputation, for their chance to re-enter a normal life now that Jesus was dead. And behind the locked doors, the timid disciples must have been, surveying their options. Could they return to Galilee to fish or collect taxes as before? Would the Jewish authorities recognize them as accomplices to Jesus? Were they marked men in the streets? Or could they simply, slink back into anonymity of the crowd and return to their former lives? Yeah, fear magnifies every sound and every anxious thought. How the normal sounds of the street below must have sounded like approaching steps of the Roman legionnaires. How often did the wind outside sound like whispering approaches of the spies? Have you ever noticed how much time and energy in life we waste fearing things that never even come up? What a waste. What a sad waste of the precious gift of life. If it's lost and locked behind the door of fear. But Jesus comes to the room locked up in fear, and he bypasses the locks and the doors to appear in the very middle of our hearts, dispelling the fear that had grabbed us and gripped us and banishing it into some space out there. Peace. Jesus announces to the fearful disciples and to us. Peace overcomes the fear like a sudden light turned on in a dark room, pushing the shadows to the corners. And are you locked up in fear today? Are you spending enormous amounts of energy hiding and protecting and dreading the unknown future? The risen Lord comes to us all, as he came to the disciples, to banish fear with his presence and his peace. He knows our hidden places, our hidden secrets, our hidden fears, and Jesus has come intimately close into our very hiding place, to set us free, to live, to love, and serve in the daylight. Secondly, this text shows us the locks of guilt and failure on our hearts and on the hearts of disciples. What was it like to be one of those disciples in that room after the crucifixion of their Lord? Did they talk about their failure to live up to those brash claims? Only days ago they would each die for him rather than betray him? Or did they simply rehearse that utter failure in individual silence? We do not know. But we do know that Jesus came into the locked room to unlock more than doors. He came to unlock the hearts of his disciples, imprisoned in the memory of their recent failure. Jesus spoke to them about forgiveness of sins, both theirs and the sins of others like us who would follow Jesus with inconsistent steps. Forgiveness is a powerful force, and Jesus had come back from the grave to let us all know that our failures do not have to be the final word about any of us. If, as George Michael sang, guilty feet have got no rhythm, then the disciples surely had 2 left feet after the crucifixion of Jesus. But Jesus came back to restore them, to forgive them, to invite them back into the dance. Isn't that good news for all of us who have failed? And we all have. Each of us have our own times. We've stepped on the toes of a partner or stumbled and fell at the crucial moment in the dance. And we thought we are out forever, banished like dismissed celebrities on, Dancing with the Stars. And then Jesus shows up and we hear the incredible news: the guilty feet can again regain their rhythm. And the name of the tune for this second dance of grace is called Forgiveness. Anyone want to dance to that melody? And finally, John's gospel invites us to step beyond the locks of doubt and intellectual agnosticism. Only a week went by and the disciples were already full of hope and new life after seeing the risen Jesus and receiving the gift of forgiveness. But Thomas was not there on that first Easter night. He heard about the appearance of Jesus, and he could see the transformed demeanor of his friends as the shackles of fear and guilt had fallen from their hearts. But Thomas was one of those people who did not borrow other people's faith. He had to experience everything for himself. And this is not a bad thing to say about Thomas or any of us. We can wish faith on people, but they have to do it on their own. Notice that Jesus does not scold Thomas for his intellectual approach to faith. Jesus knew that each of us must come to faith on our own. And you notice that Thomas came back to the community. That was important. For some, the path of faith is almost painless and easy, but for others like Thomas, faith does not come easily or simply. It must be tested, felt, experienced, and challenged in order to be real. And Thomas stands at the head of a great line of believers who were also this way in this regard. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, the great C.S. Lewis, to name just a few. But even intellectual doubters can become locked up in their doubt and questions. And so with tenderness and persistence, Jesus comes to set Thomas free too. It is a sweet sound to hear any lock click open and hit the dust, isn't it? What has you locked up today? Is it fear or guilt or intellectual doubt? Here is the good news. Whatever the lock, Jesus is the key, and he has come back from the grave to set you free. Now that's good news, isn't it? And the people said, Amen.